What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to the second episode of the day of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. And next week, we're bringing you a special series called Surviving My Biggest Case. So this is actually my third show of the day. I recorded one of those today about a serial killer named Scott Kimball. If you haven't heard of him, look him up. We have the FBI agent, Johnny Grusing, who hunted him down and caught him and told us the story. But tonight, it is a much different sort of mystery that we are examining, unfolding right now in the cold, dark depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, the frantic search is ongoing for the missing submersible called Titan, which is carrying 5 passengers to the Titanic wreckage site. Now it is in desperation mode as oxygen is set to run out soon. The big question of the evening: can the 5 passengers aboard, including a teenager who's on there with his father, can he and the others still be saved? We put together an amazing panel for you. Andy Norris, the man in the grayish Oxford shirt, 22 years service as a U.S. Coast Guard attorney. He retired from the service in 2016 with rank of captain. He was appointed as a court-martial trial court judge, then a Coast Guard Court of Criminal Appeals judge. He qualified as a Marine casualty investigator and became a maritime trial attorney. He's also an adjunct professor at Williams Law School and does it all, including joins us here on Surviving the Survivor. The man in what appears to be the blue T-shirt with the funky-looking background, that is Professor X, as he likes to be called, or Nicholas Zyros. He is the Jerome L. Goldman Endowed Professorship in Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering at the University of New Orleans. We welcome him. And last but not least, Butch Hendrick, who looks like he could be on the Titan. He looks like an explorer. He is the president and founder of Lifeguard System. He's been training water rescue and dive teams how to find submerged bodies and evidence for more than 50 years in more than 15 countries, and his bio goes on for pages and pages. He can only stay with us for about 20 minutes, so we're going to get right into this. Everyone, please get your questions lined up for these experts. Butch, to you first, as I unmute you here with limited time. We all have limited time, some more than others, but Butch, to you, there's about...
Can I have 1 second?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go to Andy, to you first here. There are about 12 hours, if not less, of oxygen left. And is this a salvageable operation? Can they still be saved, in your opinion?
First of all, good evening. Thanks for having me aboard, as it were. So I don't want to be the person who says never or can't or won't. There's always hope. But hope is waning by the minute. As you alluded to, there's about 12 hours of oxygen left. And we're engaged in a extremely difficult search, which then would have to be followed up by an extremely difficult recovery. And that all has to be done in about 12 hours.
Butch Hendrick, to you, there's a Navy SEAL, a former commander named Jeff Eggers. I just saw him interviewed. He says that piloting a submersible is like navigating in outer space. He says you might as well be on the moon. Does he make a valid point here? How difficult is this search and right now rescue effort? Hopefully it does not become a recovery one.
Well, if you were to go to Mystic, Connecticut, to the Mystic Museum and play with one of the little ROVs that they have in a swimming pool, after you have crashed it about 40 times and hope you have not damaged it too badly, you start to realize this is not a game. When we take and look at a unit like that, we can't have an umbilical or a cable to it because at 12,000 feet, the coefficient drag of the cable will control it. You will have no control over the unit at all. Now, if I add a current, you might as well have just left it on deck as far as I'm personally concerned. And I can see a couple of people here agreeing with me on that. So yeah, it's a talent. It takes hundreds of hours to learn how to use it. And now we're talking 12,000 feet, 4,000 meters below the water. It's not a game.
Yeah. By the way, STS Nation, Butch is only staying on for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have another guest come up at the bottom of the hour. So you're going to see a little shuffling back and forth, just to forewarn you. So the name of the company, the submersible, is called Titan, but the company is Ocean Gate. This is a 22-foot submersible which lost contact with its support ship Sunday about an hour and 45 minutes into its dive, and on board are a British adventurer, two members of a prominent Pakistani business family from London, a Titanic expert, and the CEO himself of Ocean Gate, which is a Washington state-based company. Dr. X, I am not T-Pain, says, I'm trying to stay hopeful about all this. Hearing from Andrew and Roger will be really helpful. What do you think about the circumstance right now? It's obviously very dire, but it seems like Andy's a little more skeptical. Do you have hope that these 5 can be saved, Dr. X?
Thanks for having me on my turn as well. It's a slim chance, but where I come from, we say hope dies last. So we can only hope and pray for these folks. I think there is a huge effort underway right now involving at least 3 nations, to my knowledge, maybe more. I've heard a French system has been recruited. Of course, there are Canadian and U.S. assets, and we can only hope for the best. There were these sounds that were intercepted earlier on that were coming into at regular intervals. So there is a slim chance of saving these people, but it's still a slim chance. It's not, nothing is guaranteed here. Yeah.
And it gets slimmer and slimmer when you start to hear some of the details. So the spokesperson for the Coast Guard today said that there are, quote, limited rations, meaning food is running out. And less, as we said, than a half a day supply of oxygen, less than 12 hours at this point. By the way, there are no seats in the Titan. You have to sit on the floor, and some people are facing one way because it's so tight. Others are facing the other way. There's one toilet, no seats. And they're also imagining, experts are, like these gentlemen, that they're out of power. Butch, do you think that they are probably or likely out of power at this point?
There's a more than reasonable chance that their power source is gone. I would imagine, based on a couple of the individuals who are in that unit, that they realized when they were in trouble, let's start conserving power, let's start conserving energy. But the hypothermia that's going to be affecting them is going to be causing breathing to become very difficult, in my opinion. Now, one thing that I think is important, we continuously talk about 96 hours. But to my knowledge, it was never tested with 5 individuals or even 3 or 4 individuals for its time window and the use of oxygen and how well the scrubbers would work. So we're gambling on a mathematical projection that was never realistically tried.
That's really interesting.
And that's a very big concern. One of the things I'd like to add, because in case I might have to go, is that we don't know that the communication is shut down in both directions. What we do know is that they're not receiving communication from the submersible. We don't know that the submersible is not still receiving some sort of communication from them. When we look at any major disaster, communication is one of the most important parts of anything. Any war zone, communication is imperative, and it constantly breaks down. So they could be actually still receiving, and that's why there might be tapping, trying to give out information. I'm sorry.
Not at all. I want to get back to that tapping in a minute, but I want to also kind of dive in, pun intended, into your experience. You've been doing these sorts of recovery efforts for 50 years, your bio says. Where would this rank in terms of the difficulty of trying to save these people?
1,000 times greater than almost anything that anyone has ever attempted before. We've got a bigger problem if we find it. I personally believe it got entangled and it's sitting attached somewhere. And the reason its self-deploying lifting system is not working is because it can't. It's caught on the bottom. Like a scuba diver in black water, suddenly we're trapped. And we train on how to get out of it. There's no training in this because there's no manipulative arms. There's only one door. But at 12,000 feet, even running a side scan sonar, you think of the angle, I've got to have minimum 36,000 feet of cable to tow the side scan in order for it to do its job. So when we start looking at getting down there, it's once we find it, getting them, and we have to bring them back to the surface or we can't get them out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I know you got to get that too. I'm going to mute you while we hang on. Andy, this is, so these noises that Butch was just talking about, this banging, potentially on the hull, or I don't know what the correct terminology is, of this submersible. Do you believe it is coming from the Titan, these noises that are being heard?
Well, first of all, the Coast Guard has said in their official statement is that they detected underwater noises in the search area. Rolling Stone magazine is the publication that says that they've read some emails or some memos from Department of Homeland Security in which the Coast Guard operates that describes as banging and rhythmic banging, or in sort of period every some time frame. So there has been no official confirmation that this is anything other than ambient ocean noise. There's plenty of noise in the oceans from living sources, non-living sources. And so all we know is that some underwater sounds were detected, and they are being analyzed by professionals in the U.S. Navy and otherwise. The best professionals in the world are supposed to be analyzing this sound, and but there's been no official announcement as what that analysis has revealed. And again, only a media source that says that it was banging. So that's, so it's something. It's enough that the U.S. Coast Guard says that they have redeployed some assets as a result. So it's something, but nonetheless, it's far from anything conclusive that these guys are still alive at all.
All right, hang on one sec. I just want to check in with Butch. I know you have a lot of interviews, so if you have to jump, Butch, you just go. My final question to you, though, what about these banging sounds? Do you believe it's coming from the submersible?
I like to be positive whenever I can, because if I can stay positive, I can keep the other searchers, the people who work for me, or the people I'm training, positive. While you stay positive, you have high energy and high morale. So is it possible that banging is coming out of the submersible? Yes. Is it possible, based on a couple of the individuals who are in there, that they understand Morse code? Undoubtedly, right? I believe they do. Could they be trying to just send out a signal? It could also just be something banging against the hull that's laying there, and the currents are severely changing, like the Andrea Doria. They change so dramatically you can't even predict them. So, but it could very well be that they're knocking on the inside saying, it's almost over for us, please help.
But Butch, you seem like you have ice in your veins. I just met you a few minutes ago. I would want you to be the captain of my airplane that I'm about to get on this weekend. Even if you don't know how to fly.
I happen to have my own airplane.
Oh, there you go. You seem like you would.
I have my own plane. I've had my pilot's license. I've had several airplanes, and just sold a Borget low-blow chopper.
Can you fly a 747, you think?
No, I cannot, but I can fly a Strike Master jet, British jet.
What would you be doing right now? Probably easier said than done and answered. But if you were in that Titan right now, what, if anything, could you do?
You can just attempt to keep the cramps from hurting you so bad that you can't breathe. You can attempt to keep anyone and everyone that's still in there and alive breathing slowly and thinking positive, even though the back of your brain says, this isn't going to work. And I believe that at least one individual in that unit, in that submersible, has lived a life saying, I can have anything I want in life, and I'm not afraid of death. Or that if that person could not have gone into outer space. He could not have done the other things he's done in his life. So because of that, if he's not frightened of dying, as many of us are not, you can't live certain lives and not be and walk around scared. He is doing everything he can to keep anyone else that's alive in there positive until he's gone. That's what I believe.
To the other guests, I promise to give you more parody in just a moment, but I'm fascinated by Butch. You have to go, Butch?
I've got about 4 more minutes, and Australia's calling me back, and I have to go on with them.
Butch, what was the scariest situation you personally found yourself in?
One of two, but one on the UH-53 submarine, being suddenly found myself snagged up underneath one of the stern tubes and realizing that I didn't bring enough cutting tools. Right? Obviously, I got out, but it changed the way I played the game. Right? The other was one time being in a van, trying to pull 2 young people out of a van that was upside down in a river, when I did not tie back the door I went in, and it closed. So now my tether line was snapped in between the frame of the vehicle and the door. I was inside, and with it upside down, my air bubbles removed the carpet that was now the ceiling, which would have been the floor, and it laid on top of me. So I now had a 12-year-old in my hands, a carpet over the top of me, and my exit was no longer reasonably available. And I thought today's the day, you know. So then you stop, long, slow breaths, think about it, put it back together, realize it's upside down. The trip to open the door is up, not down. And got myself out. Never made that mistake or trained anyone to ever make that mistake again.
Butch, I'm going to have a scotch.
Thank you.
My palms are soaking wet. Promise me you'll come back, Butch.
I will. And I'm thrilled to be with these 2 individuals. It's just, wow, to be in the same picture frame with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Big honor. Thank you. Take care, Butch.
Thank you.
And just like that, Butch is gone. Wow, that really, the palms are sweating. So Andy, back to you. And now we'll have a little more even-handedness here. So once these banging noises were heard, the spokesperson for the Coast Guard said that ships were redirected to kind of re-examine the search area and create new parameters. But Butch was talking about the current. I mean, Andy, if you can just talk, because we're all lay people here. I mean, how complex is the ocean in terms of the currents, especially around there? I mean, this is like 400 miles east of Cape Cod, not far from where you are in Rhode Island. But I mean, just how complicated is this?
Well, so in terms of the currents, and that's really that this is a search and rescue operation that is really 2 separate operations in a way. There's the surface search. That is what the U.S. Coast Guard is, what Coast Guards do around the world all the time. They have trained helicopter crews, they have trained aircraft crews, they have trained vessel crews. They operate with each other in a coordinated manner. They do complicated search patterns based upon ocean conditions, the set, the drift, currents. So that's what's happening right now. So they're looking on the surface in case this thing has come up. It's small and it's a huge ocean. And so it's going to be drifting with the currents. And so the Coast Guard is trying to find it if it's on the surface. At the same time, concurrently, they're also looking under the surface, presumably anywhere through the water column, 2.5 miles of depth, all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. They're trying to find this thing using technology. And the conditions at the bottom of the sea are dreadful, otherworldly. It's like, the worst outer space thing you can imagine. It's pitch black. There's no light below about 1,000 feet. So below about 1,000 feet, there's no light at all. Pitch black. The temperature is effectively at freezing, so that's where Butch was talking about the hypothermia setting in for these guys, and the conditions. It's described that the depths there is dangerous, hostile, with inconsistent ebbs, inconsistent currents. So even down at those depths, the water conditions are not favorable. So this is the operating environment that the searchers are having to contend with.
And I want to stay positive like Butch, but you can't help but think that this is a horrendous way to go, because they know it's coming if they are not saved. It is freezing. It is dark. There's no food. It's horrible. So let's hope for a good outcome here. Dr. X, I learned about you because you're all over USA Today. You said that there is a good chance that the banging noises heard by the search crews did in fact come from the submersible called Titan. But you said it's good and bad news because it might mean people on board are trying to communicate. However, you said because sound can travel long distances and does not move in a straight path underwater, it might not help narrow down the position. Can you explain that a little bit? Again, everyone here watching is a layperson. You come here with a lot of knowledge, but if you could explain what you're saying there.
Yeah, the best, if not the only, means of communication underwater is sound. Light and radio travel badly, if at all, especially at the depths that we are considering here. So that's why ROVs, for example, are outfitted with umbilicals and tethers to connect them to the surface with electrical signals.
Dr. X, what apologies for my ignorance, but what is an ROV? We keep hearing that.
Yeah, sorry. It stands for remotely operated vehicle. That is a vehicle that it is actually connected with a tether to the surface, and there is an operator, more like a drone for the air. The operator is sitting in the comfort or relative comfort of a mothership on the surface and sends commands and receives back signals like optical signals or audio signals or other sensor signals from the deep and adjusts the motion of the vehicle using something like a Game Boy console or something along those lines. And that's a remotely operated vehicle. It's very commonly used. I think it was used, for example, in the first survey to locate the Titanic back in the 80s or whenever it was used. It was used in the Deep Blue incident to locate the problem and then to stop the sprouting of oil coming out of the vent on the seabed. So that's what a remotely operated vehicle is. The problem with we could deploy remotely operated vehicles in this case, but remotely operated vehicles do not have a very large radius, especially at that depth from the mothership. So we must have a very good prior knowledge of at least the approximate location of the craft where it may be laying right now. But the sounds that came were sharp metallic bangs. They were not like, for example, whale sounds or other like seal sounds or like marine mammal or dolphin sounds and things like that. That's what they were described, at least in the briefings. And also they repeated in very fixed and significant time intervals, I think about 30 minutes apart for 2 or 3 times. So there is a good chance that they're being made by a human inside some kind of a metallic structure. I mean, there might be another metallic structure there, I don't know, or maybe an alien structure that they're trying to communicate, but probably, not probably, I'm just saying, it is a good chance that they're coming from the south. Now, in contrast to light in the air, sound waves underwater travel more or less like light travels through a prism. So they get diffracted and constantly changing their path. So you cannot kind of triangulate or even know which direction they're coming from. You may be getting reflections from the seabed, from various strata and layers in the ocean that they may produce a waveguide effect that they may cause reflections to occur and things like that. Plus, the sound can travel really very long distances underwater. For example, back in the Cold War days, the Navy used to have acoustic technology that was able to detect Soviet submarines coming offshore of North Cape into the Atlantic Ocean when they were entering the Atlantic Ocean. So you can see how long the distances sound can travel. So this is good news if it is coming from the guys on the craft, on the submersible, that they are, at least some of them are still alive and conscious and like functional. But at the same time, it's also bad news because we're getting more and more anxiety trying to help them, but really there's little we can do to spot the source of the sounds. That's at least what I can gather from the briefings that were made by the Coast Guard and the rescue teams.
Very, very well explained there. Andy, to you, how at that depth of the ocean, how noisy are there a lot of sounds in the ocean at that depth?
I wouldn't want to speak out of turn. I do know that the ocean, there's a lot of what's described as white noise in the ocean, and anything from bivalves to whales and otherwise. So I wouldn't say that I have the expertise in exactly what depths or what levels, but my understanding is the ocean is a noisy place, and that is why skilled operators have to, when they've been trying to detect submarines or whatever it is, they're very skilled operators that can separate out what is the sound of machinery from the sound of whales doing their thing or whatever it is that's in the ocean.
And Andy, let's say hypothetically, as Dr. X thinks it could be, this noise is coming from the submersible. Is it still a moot point? I mean, is there, even if they know it's coming from it, is there enough time to find it and do something? Because they'd have to bring it up 12,000 feet with all this limited time, oxygen, and everything against them.
Well, so, that's, first of all, Dr. X, as he explained it, is the difficulty of even using it as a location type tool. But even if they were to find these guys, if they're at the bottom of the sea, then your problems are only half over, as a previous guest said. I mean, this is 1,000 times. It's million times more difficult than anything that really has been conceived. So you're going to have to, if you can find them, then the question is, how do you get this vessel back to the surface? Because there is no rescue at those depths. The U.S. Navy has rescue vessels that for its submarines, they're purpose built so they can form a seal around the hatch in submarines, and they can go to the assistance of a submarine that has sunk, and they can remove people from a submarine at depth, but they can only operate to 2,000 feet. The most capable equipment of that nature, which is purpose built, can only operate to 2,000 feet. This is at 12,800 feet. there's nothing. There's no vessel at all that could remove these guys from the submersible. It has to be brought to if it's at the bottom or in the water column. It really doesn't anywhere short of the surface. It has to be brought to the surface.
And Andy, I want to get back to you because you are a retired Coast Guard about the operations. But Dr. X, this is kind of a much bigger question, but you'll see here this comment from Jay Watts. Hey, from Northern Ireland, this is all we're talking about here in Belfast, followed by this comment. I've been obsessed with the Titanic since I've been a little girl. No matter the amount of money I had, I would never make that trip. Me neither. What is it about the ocean and the fascination? I mean, what got you so interested in this to make it a career? Why do you think people are so invested in this right now?
I think it's, compassion and even if they wouldn't make the choice to go on this trip, they're still fascinated by sea stories, as the Marines call them. It's a fascinating place, and I can tell you this: it's very close to outer space, not another planet particularly, but outer space. You have the lack of oxygen, you have the darkness, you have the cold, and you have a pressure problem. It's an overpressure problem, while in space is actually an under pressure problem, to put it bluntly, but it's still a pressure problem. That's why I guess NASA is actually using underwater training to train astronauts that are going to go on spacewalks and the like, because it's a hostile environment, as hostile as space can be. So this fascinates people, at least a big number, a great number of people. So I think that's what is the situation. Plus, these people were pioneering a new kind of adventure, a new kind of pursuit. So even probably they all knew what they were getting into, and they were very conscious about it. We still want them to come out alive and strong and in one piece, and all of them. I'll be the last one to give up hope for this one, because I want them to come back, like most of your viewers probably, as I can.
Yeah. Very well said. Sir Barry here, does anyone know the temperature? Dr. X would know the answer at the Titanic site. And how would it affect the people in the submersible?
Yeah, I think just like in space, like I said before, your first danger is lack of oxygen. Your second danger is pressure. And your third danger is hypothermia. Okay, I think I can speculate to a certain extent that the initial cause of the failure was probably some kind of a power failure. That's what I can kind of speculate right now. So that means that there's no mean to heat the interior of the sub of the craft. So the temperature down there is slightly above freezing. Bear in mind that seawater, because of the salt in it, freezes a little bit lower than fresh water does. So you can say that it is in the neighborhood of 32 or 33 Fahrenheit. And now they have been down there for so many hours, if not days. So unless there was some kind of artificial heat source keeping them hot, it is probably going to be very cold inside the craft. There is a small layer, relatively small, close to the surface, called thermocline, which at which the temperature starts rising as we go from bottom up. But below that depth of the thermocline, actually you have a constant temperature which is very low and very close to freezing. Okay, so that's the thing, because the sunlight, like I said earlier, cannot travel underwater. That's the thing. So it's not just that it is dark; it's also super cold. That's the idea.
Dr. X, I live in Miami, and the water here is a little too cold for me, so I can't imagine what it's
Yeah,
like for them. I know you have to. I don't want to let you go, but I know you have to
yeah.
leave at the bottom. If you want to come,
Plus, I lived in Fort Lauderdale, very close to you, for 3 or 4 years. The water, just it is like in New Orleans, it's quite shallow. There, I mean, relatively shallow. Okay, that's why we can drill in the Gulf and things like that. Where these people are located, it's actually a big trench. That's why it's so deep. So you are way below the thermocline over there. So it's gonna be very cold inside that boat. Even if they're halfway deep, not like all the way to the bottom, even if they're halfway deep, it's already very cold in there, unless they can find a heat source, which it's not very probable that they can right
wow,
now.
wow.
So
Do you have to
yeah,
go,
okay.
Dr. X, or can you stay?
Maybe yeah. If you have a last one or two last questions or remarks, I can help with. Yeah.
Well, I'll ask you Sarah's question here. She says obvious question, and Butch sort of answered it, but what do you think happened? What's your best guess as to what happened? Do you think it got caught on some sort of line or got, jammed up in the Titanic potentially?
They could have got entangled. That's one possibility. Or the other thing is they might have lost power. They might have experienced a very serious power failure. Maybe they got their main battery bank flooded or something like that. It must, if it doesn't end on the surface, then it means that they could not deploy their surfacing like emergency system, which is, I think, should be at least that's how I would design it, independent of the battery, or at least being functional, even if there is a serious or total battery failure, um, uh, which in this case would mean that the craft got entangled someplace or got hit by a whale or something, and then cannot deploy the surfacing mechanism. That's what I would. That's what we can say right now. Um, uh, at this point, you know,
Dr. X, your insight is fascinating. I hope that you will come back as we get more developments.
certainly. Just let me know, and I'll try to make time to talk with you again. It's been very good, and it's really good to meet Dr. Norris and you, Joe.
Thank you
Okay.
so much. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Yeah.
Andy, it's just me and you and STS Nation. And when your
Talk
wife,
with me.
so JMM Barkovich, and I do feel bad. So let me know when you have to bounce, but I'd love to keep you for a little while here to take some questions. But any reason why no signaling device that you know of, or is there one and they simply may have lost power?
So there is one. The the communication mechanisms that this submersible has there's two. Interestingly enough, that there's two-way text with the control units at the surface that they can communicate with the sub, and then the sub also has a pinger, an acoustic signal that sends out a ping, or supposed to send out a ping every 30 minutes to signal that it's okay. When communications were lost with this sub about an hour and a half into its dive, the pinging sound disappeared as well. So what that then says is that when you just heard about the possibility of them having lost power, that sort of indicates that it may have been something to do with a loss of power, because that the pinging the sound stopped.
Here's a question that seems obvious, but is much easier asked than done. Casey in Boston, have they checked the actual Titanic and debris area yet? That's where they were headed. Hang on one sec. I'm going to bring in Sal. Are you there?
I am here. I apologize for my tardiness.
Absolutely not. Let me just tell the audience, welcome, Sal. Please meet attorney Andy Norris and Dr. Sal Mercogliano, if I'm saying it right. He's an associate professor of history at Campbell University in North Carolina, an adjunct professor at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Marine Transportation from the State University of New York Maritime College. The bottom line is this guy knows a lot about the ocean. And welcome and thank you for being here. I'm going to have you take some questions. We're kind of in the middle of it, but just stand by, Dr. M, and we'll be right with you. But to this, Andy, checking the actual Titanic and debris area, not as easy as it sounds, right?
Not as easy as it sounds. So you're talking about which would be the search component, the search at the bottom that is going on. But in order to, how are you going to look underwater at 2.5 miles, 12,800 feet deep? Well, the only way you're going to look is by sending down a submersible, an ROV, like was described earlier. But these are effectively robots at the end of a huge long tether. And so you have to deploy these things and then send them down. And then you control the movements from the surface through a fiber optic cable, and you can turn it one way, turn it the other. Now, these things, they do have lights and they do have cameras, so the operator can see, but they can only see a very limited distance, and it's where that light happens to be pointing. They also have sonar, what's called side scan sonar on them, which can send out a ping and detect things on the seabed that are rising up off the seabed. But then those have to be analyzed and further explored if it looks like it could be this missing submersible. So there's a lot of stuff that has to go right just to see what is down there. You have to be able to, first of all, you have to have a ROV on site that even has that capability and that has that operational depth. And then you have to, the sea state has to be correct or right to allow for it to be deployed, because if it's bobbing up too much, then you snap the fiber optic cable and you lose the device. So they can only operate up to certain sea states. And then if the sea state is right, then you start lowering it down the 2.5 miles to where the Titanic is, and you hope there isn't a fault, an electrical short circuit or whatever it is on the way. That's what the search involves. And even if all that goes well, you're just limited in what you can see and how you see it, whether through a radar signal or a sonar signal or visually, but with at very sort of short distances. And there's a huge debris field, so you're looking amongst all this debris and you're singling out, finding that one piece of thing that is the right piece of debris, as it were, amongst that huge field. That's what you're contending with.
By the way, prior to this story breaking, I had no idea the Titanic crashed this close to the United States. For some reason, I thought it was much further into the middle of the Atlantic. And it's also why I prefer to watch Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie than ever go down to actually see it myself. But that's just me. Pam Hart Young says, "Hi, Joel and STS Best Guest. I was just telling my daughter in Idaho last night that I'm surprised the crew is not beating on the walls of that submersible to create a sound. I pray they save them." Dr. M, we've been discussing this. Do you think those banging sounds were, in fact, coming from the submersible? And what do you think possibly happened to it?
I think the sounds, the way the Coast Guard reports it every 30 minutes with a sound, that gives you a kind of an indication, okay, this is not something natural. If it's a time, if it's happening. I will say that is not enough time for the sonar to really track it. You have to remember that most military sonar is not geared to operate at this depth. When you start dropping sonobuoys and you start using military assets, a conventional Navy sub or a nuclear sub, but a traditional military sub operates maybe down to a depth of about 1,000 feet. Titanic's at 13,000 feet. And so this is a really deep area, and most sonobuoys, especially listening either in passive or using their active sonar, has a very limited range. You literally are going to have to drop these buoys right on top to get a hearing of that. And then if they're only hitting for a short period of time, it's really hard to triangulate. One of the issues that has to be brought up is the fact that this submersible is not fitted with any sort of emergency beacon of any kind, assuming it's still intact. A beacon would allow you to home in on it. And that's something that you see on board ships. Ships are designed to carry what's called an EPIRB, an emergency positioning indicating radio beacon that floats off when the ship sinks, or the vessel data recorder, actually, much like an airplane's black box, has a kind of a sound emitter. So you can home in on it directly.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but why did this not have a beacon? It seems obvious to have one.
This ship is not the ship has not been classified by an agency. This ship has been built by OceanGate, and the CEO of OceanGate really talks about this a lot in an amazing way. He kind of defied it. He has 3 submersibles. One of them is certified by an entity called the American Bureau of Shipping, which is a classification agency. This is the analogy I use. It's like having your car inspected. That's what ABS is. They're the inspection agency. They go in and make sure everything is fitted normally, everything's operating, and you're meeting your requirements. One of his 3 submersibles was certified by ABS. ABS has a 273-page manual on submersibles. This is what you need. He argued, the CEO argued, well, classification agencies will slow us down. They're redundant because I am much safer than the agency, and therefore I don't need them. The other issue is I'm operating in international waters. I'm beyond 12-mile limit. I'm outside the territorial waters, and therefore there's no boat police who are going to come in and certify me. Now, I think that's a problem because they're on board a Canadian ship coming out of a Canadian port. I think Canada is going to have to, the transport ministry is going to have to talk about this, about why there wasn't inspections of it. Now, they're not breaking the law. That's the problem here. It's the lawless sea. It's the wild, wild west out there in the ocean in some cases. And you can get away with it until something bad happens, as in this case.
And I want to get into this more with Andy. Kristen Grogan says, the submersible has one button inside, a toilet, and it's controlled. This is true by a Logitech, like a joystick, remote controller. What the F? And there were problems with it in 2022. This I didn't actually recall, but there've been a bunch of comments. Andy, to you, later on, I want to get, and I know you don't have that much later on because I don't want your wife to kill you, Andy, but I want to get into some of the potential liability here. But Madeline says, any idea why it took the crew 8 hours to report this major issue? Same question from Lorna. The subcontractors didn't report it for 8 hours. Do we have any idea why?
No. Especially when you think about time being of the essence and of the ultimate essence, every second is critical. So that's a bit of a problem. But as our other guest here mentioned, is that this is a vessel that is in international waters. If it was in U.S. waters, there's a mandatory requirement as soon as a casualty has occurred, or as soon as immediate corrective actions to take care of the casualty have occurred, then you have to notify the Coast Guard. Out here, there is no requirement under the law. So they're really a notification. It's really just sort of more of a practical thing on their end. And I can only assume that they were hoping against hope that this thing would surface, because as Kristen, I think, was the guest, she mentioned that they had problems in 2022, and it's true. So what Kristen has done is watch that video from I think it was a CBS reporter who actually went down to the Titanic in 2022 in this very submersible, and he filmed it and documented it, and there's some very interesting stuff. So I highly commend for your viewers to do a search and just see what he was talking about there. But they had issues in 2022, but that's the thing. These again, because of sea state, you may try to deploy it and you can't. And that in 2022, one of the issues was the launch system. They have a purpose-built system to launch and recover this. They put it in the water in this system, and then it detaches from the launch system. There was some problem with the launch system, but there's problems with these undersea things all the time. These ROVs or these autonomous, but you're operating in the saltwater environment, which is it's terrible for electronics. It's terrible and you're operating in these conditions. And so these faults, electrical faults, short circuits, they're just common.
And David Pogue is that journalist. He works for CBS News now and did report about it. Andy, back to you here, and then we'll switch back to Sal in a moment. Just to get some of the logistics on the record here, there are 5 vessels searching on the ocean's surface from a few different countries. Underwater, there were last count 2 ROVs. Those are remote, as I learned, operated vehicles. And there's aircraft also. But you were in the Coast Guard, pulling back the proverbial curtain. What's going on behind the scenes right now with the higher upper level command chain in the Coast Guard? Are they panicked? Are they worried about public perception? Are they just singularly focused on this? Are they freaking out, for lack of a better term? What's happening behind the scenes right now?
No, they're not freaking out. These are, and I'm not just service jingoistic sort of thing here. These are professionals. They have a job to do. They know how to do their job, and they're doing it. What's happening behind the scenes is that they are, there's multiple things. They're controlling the search and rescue operation that is looking for this, the aircraft and the ship. So they're controlling, they're planning the search patterns in the grid. So that's happening. They are working with experts in underwater searches and underwater recovery to try to conduct that aspect of the search, which is not the Coast Guard's bread and butter at all. It's really nobody's bread and butter. Nobody does that sort of thing. So they're trying to figure it out as they go, consulting the best experts in the world. At the same time, they're also trying to gather as much equipment as they can get out to the scene so that they can search. They can get as many things searching at the same time as possible, and so that they can have equipment on scene to do a recovery or to take whatever actions is necessary once the search actually finds a submersible. So if it is hung up under a piece of debris, for example, they're going to have some equipment on scene that has rope manipulator arms or some ROV with manipulator arms that can cut or move or somehow take action down at the bottom of the sea to free this thing up. So they're trying to get the equipment. It's a terrible logistic and organizational challenge, and that's really the biggest challenge that they're trying to face at the same time as they're trying to figure out how to even conduct this type of search.
And I do believe the Coast Guard is remaining cool, calm, and collected. They are professionals, and hopefully this will have a good ending, although it's getting more and more dire. To you, Dr. M, implosion is another major factor that has only been touched on, followed right back to back almost from Joy. I believe it is already imploded. This was an untested sub. Is that a viable possibility? Do you think that could have happened? And why would that have happened?
Well, this sub has gone down multiple times, actually. In 2021, 2022, it's done expeditions down there. So it's not the first. This is the first time this season it has gone down. There are 3, when this initially happened, there were 3 potential scenarios. Number 1 is an implosion. And understand the stresses we're dealing with here. You're talking about at the bottom 380 times atmospheric pressure. It doesn't take much to begin to crush and create problems. And all it takes is an imperfection. The ocean is unforgiving. I sailed for 7 years and I love being on the water. I love being on the ocean, but the ocean wants to kill you. It does not love you. It does not care for you. It is always trying to find a way to get you. And that is the hubris, I think, that I have a big problem with this company and the CEO, is that you do checks after checks after checks, redundancy after redundancy. I'm a diver. I never dive without a buddy diving and a backup plan. What's my plan? We know if we get in trouble, who we're going to call. How far away are we? How do you do this? And in many ways, they didn't do that here. So if there was an imperfection, then it's over immediately. I mean, that's the one thing here. The second option is it could have experienced an electrical problem. It would shed its ballast weight and it pops up. This is one of the reasons I think they delayed in calling, because as long as it takes to go down, it takes a while to come back up too. And they may have waited to see if it surfaced and to find it. And it's difficult to find. This thing is the size of a minivan in the Atlantic. It's a really difficult small speck to find. If it's on the bottom, you have multiple problems. I mean, everyone keeps talking about the air supply in it, but if their power is out, it's cold. It's almost freezing temperatures at the bottom. You're talking about hypothermia, you're running out of water. It's just, it's a nightmare scenario to be trapped in this thing with no power in the dark.
I would like to add something, and I think those points were all very interesting with regard to the implosion. It is as the slightest defect, right? It may have held up for the first whatever number of dives, and then this one, so that is a possibility. There was a Argentinian submarine that sank in 2017 that had a casualty, and then it sank below crushed depth and ultimately imploded. And the thing is that sound was detected. So as our earlier guests talked about with propagation of sound through waters and through nations having devices in the sea, both for military and for scientific and other purposes, and with a lot of interest in sound at sea. So there are devices that can pick up sound. There have not been any news reports of the sound of a sharp what would be explosion-like sound because this is instantaneous, so there haven't been any news reports of that. And I've been waiting to see if any of those would start emerging, which then might give a clue as to whether that is what happened.
I would add to that too. The San Luis is also a metal bigger submarine, and so that's one of the problems in this submersible. It's a really tiny thing, and to go back through things like SOSUS arrays and detect that, it may get buried because that sound would be so muffled, but they will be able to detect it at a point. I think it could have been missed because of the size of this object at the time. Plus, it's not built out of traditional steel. It's that composite alloy or composite material they use to kind of build it.
Dr. Rem, we talked about this before you got on. Michelle Guest says, hello, STS Nation guests, all the way from Australia. Love this channel. Haven't been able to stop thinking about these people. And it's horrific just thinking how scared they would be. We have people on here right now from Ireland, the UK, Australia, as you see. Why I haven't seen a news story with this kind of global interest in a while. Why such a riveted audience worldwide to this particular story?
It's Titanic. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And I got a Lego Titanic right behind me. I've been building for a year. It's one of those things. It catches the story. People know this ship. And, there's an irony to this too. I got to say, as I've been talking about this a lot over the past day or so, is that out of Titanic, we all know the story, but one of the biggest things about Titanic isn't Jack and Rose. It's that 2 years after Titanic goes down, you get the Safety of Life at Sea convention, where most of the major nations of the world come together and say, you know what, we need to do something to prevent a kind of Titanic from happening again. So we're going to mandate lifeboats. We're going to mandate lifeboat drills and life preservers. And you know what, we're going to say what distress rockets look like so that you don't think they're something else. And you know what, 24-hour radio manning. We're going to do all these things. And out of the disaster of Titanic came all these safety provisions that apply to this day, because we've seen numerous iterations of SOLAS through its incarnations. It is the law of the sea today when it comes down to rescue. And I think in many ways, you may see something similar come out of this with Titan. Titan may do this for submersibles. Understand, submersibles is very well regulated. I mean, they're used commercially throughout the world. In offshore oil, in drilling, in cables, and fiber optic cables, all the time. They're used coastal for tourists. The Bahamas have, a batch of these things. But, when you go out into the region that you're in, into this depth of water for a specific, I mean, this submersible was designed specifically for diving on Titanic. It's one of those things. And I had a lot of people ask me about this. It's like, do you think this will be the end of deep sea diving on Titanic? It's like, well, Titanic wasn't the end of transatlantic passengers. It's just, it really isn't. And, in the early 20th century, we were leery of aviation. It was the purview of the rich and the governments. Today, you don't think twice about getting on an airplane and flying at 30,000 feet. And there's going to be a day where you don't think twice about getting on a submersible and going down to 13,000 feet. We're just not there yet.
I think twice about the plane, and I'll probably think 10 million.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
As I'm getting ready to fly overseas.
Some people.
Yeah, some people. Not you, maybe, but I do. Carrie G. Now, I think we kind of touched on this.
I'm going to have to drop out, I'm afraid.
Andy, it was an absolute pleasure. I appreciate it. Dr. M, can you hang with us for a little while and take some questions?
Sure. I can hang a few minutes.
Awesome. Andy, thanks so much. I'm going to reach back out. We might do this again tomorrow.
It's a pleasure, and appreciate all the warm comments from your guests.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night. Stay safe. So Dr. M, and you just let me know how long you have. You have another 15 minutes or so?
Sure.
Okay.
Perfect.
So if Titan is found, Carrie wants to know how much time would be required to resurface safely, considering the change in pressure with the dwindling air supply. How much time do they truly have left? Right now, the number out there is a little less than 12 hours. Is that a real time or a fantasy figure there?
Well, you're going by 96 hours from the point they sealed the submersible, and that is their max time. How much time 5 people use in an incident like this, you never know. These are not rescue divers. They're 5 people who are going to be panicked, and that's of course going to change air supply on board. In terms of rescue, if you locate it, you've got a couple of scenarios, and again, the Coast Guard really hasn't talked about this, or the company. The way to bring this up is really, there's 2 ways to do it. Number one is to attach basically these airbags, these large balloons almost, and you create buoyancy and you pull it up. But it's going to take time to get the bags down there, to attach them. You need ROVs for this. This is not going to be submersibles. It'll be remotely operated vehicles going down. They have brought ROVs either to the site or en route to the site as we speak. And they would have to attach them, but then you got to bring the air down. It's a whole process to do this. The other option is a hoist it up, but again, that they've got some cable ships there that right now that are used in laying cables under the ocean. They could be used to help hoist it up, but that's another scenario. They've brought out this very high tensile strength cable, because you're not just lifting the submersible, you're lifting 13,000 feet of cable. So, it's not like you can just run to, the hardware store and get some cable and off you use that. You're going to need something that's a little bit different. And then you got to bring it to the surface. You got to open it. I mean, there's a lot of time. And unfortunately, time is the one thing they don't have. I've been a volunteer firefighter for 20 years. You go until there's a point of no return where there's no potential for them to live. And then you keep going and treating this as a rescue. And then there's still going to be, if it goes past that, the recovery. What happened to them? Because I don't think that we're going to be able to sit here and not know what happened. But that takes time. It took a long time to find Titanic. It's going to take a long time to find something this small in the ocean.
I mean, the obvious outcome we don't want is they don't get them in time. But to the point you just made, it could potentially be a very, 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 very long time till they're ever discovered, if ever. Is that right?
It can be. There was an incident back in the 70s. There's a submersible called the Pisces 3 that went down at about 1,700 feet of water, and they brought that crew up with 12 minutes of air left. So, I mean, you go to the end. That's where they had figured it out, where they were at that point. But yeah, I mean, it could become a mystery. You just don't know. Again, this is a really small object, and especially if it's crushed at that depth, it's going to get smaller, and it's going to be really difficult to find and locate. It's a really horrific story to talk about. But that's the practicalities of operating in those depths.
Yeah, it's morbid. Love vs. Money 68 says the irony of the trip is unbelievable in light of the Titanic. But I wanted to run this by you. Chris Brown is a well-known adventurer, an explorer. He's been doing the rounds on TV. He's a friend of the billionaire Hamish Harding, who's on that submersible right now. He said he was supposed to go, but he pulled out last minute because of safety concerns. And this is the quote from him. I found out they used old scaffolding poles for the sub's ballast, and its controls were based on computer game style controllers. Eventually, I emailed the company and said, I'm no longer able to go on this thing. I asked for a refund after being less than convinced. With your experience, Dr. M, would you ever have gone on this?
I don't think so. I got to say, off the shelf equipment is not unusual in industry. I mean, you see it all the time. Where something like a game controller. I mean, if you look at the way ships are controlled today, joysticks. I mean, it's if you look at a modern cruise ship, how you bring it in, it looks almost like a game controller. However, that's hardwired into the system. You're not doing it with a game controller that's not even wired in. I mean, just the fact that the battery dies, then you're out of luck. And this is the kind of redundancy that a classification agency would come in and sit there and say, where's your backup on this? Where's that redundancy in this system? The ABS requires 2 forms of communication systems that have to be in place. You need that on there. And again, it's the idea that, okay, I want professionals ensuring that this is a safe environment for me to go into. And again, I know the sea. I know the dangers associated with it, and going underwater in particularly just magnifies it. I've been in submarines. I understand how they operate and how they work. Submersibles are a whole different deal because they're completely dependent on that parent ship to be a mother for them, to be able to pick them up and deposit them. Communication is key. And a lot of, the reason you hear a lot about these aborts is because this submersible did not have a lot of backups. And when primary systems start going down, you have to abort. You have to come back up.
Merritt Seeger says, pray for them, everyone. I guess that's all that can be done right now. So there's an employee named Dave Lockridge of OceanGate, formerly, and he kind of blew the whistle. There are documents publicly available now that show that he warned that there might be safety problems and it could have a quote unquote catastrophic outcome. OceanGate turned around and sued this guy because they said he, went against an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And so they filed suit against him, and the case was eventually settled. I know you're not an attorney, at least I don't think you are, Dr. M, but from a liability standpoint, how does this change the game moving forward for these companies? Is there going to be a whole lot more regulation now?
I'm not an attorney, but I'm married to one. So next best thing. And as my wife told me the other day, you can't wave away basically I don't want to say incompetence, but liability. If you're not doing due diligence, you can't waive that with a signature. I mean, the company has to do what is necessary. Lockridge, in his statements, I think are very indicative. If you watch what the CEO said in interviews and on his video and on his blog, on his website, he basically made the statement that I don't want 50-year-old white guys, basically telling him what to do. I really want to, build this outside the norms. I want to bring in, young people with the aviation industry in the background. That's what they wanted, which is great. It's fantastic. He wanted to propel undersea tourism. The problem is you need that catch. You need that experience at times, which this person was, and saying there, listen, you're going past a lot of the issues that we need to make sure that we're enacting. And again, that's the whole reason for the classification. A good friend of mine did a video on this, and he talks about this. The U.S. Navy learned in blood what happens when you send submarines into the ocean and you don't do enough to ensure that. You see it with the Scorpion, you see it with the Thresher, but since then you haven't seen anything with U.S. Navy submarines, and that's the reason, is because they have that kind of redundancy in place.
Salome Hart, just to show how far this story goes in terms of global attention. It is 1:14 in the morning in South Africa. I can't sleep worrying about these people. My worst nightmare is to be trapped underwater in the dark with oxygen running out. In a weird way, the media is sort of comforting because we're all together in this throughout the world now. We can all kind of watch this together and help each other. But it is a very eerie story. Lord only knows if it could be marine life form that hit them, put them off course. This was a comment I was looking for because this is close to what we're talking about, but yet different. Reminds me of the Chilean miners and the Thai soccer team. Hope there's a positive outcome here too. They were trapped. Hopefully they can get out of this. Dr. M, back to you. So one of the employee, this guy, David Lockridge, concerns, if you could translate this for me, he said he primarily became focused on the company's decision to rely on sensitive acoustic monitoring, cracking or popping sounds made by the hull under pressure to detect flaws rather than a scan of the hull. Lockridge said the company told him no equipment existed that could perform such a test on the 5-inch thick carbon fiber hull. What does this mean in English?
So what they're basically saying is they were listening for sounds that would indicate as they went through test dives whether there was problems with the hull, because they're using a substance not usually used in submergence. In submergence, you're usually in a big metal sphere. I mean, that's usually what most deep sea submergence is. You're in a metal ball. And then you have these windows, which look like big, huge, massive triangles because they push into the window. So you look through that little tiny peephole, but it's a bigger window on the outside. And the pressure is actually pushing that in. You want a nice sphere because that pressure is equal around the entire area. They created a tube, and that tube isn't metal. It's this carbon fiber element that really hasn't been used before. And then at the end of it, they literally glued on titanium caps onto it. And what a classification society would probably have required is a survey of that hull, with, some sort of x-ray or some sort of machine to define flaws. I joke about this. My son loved Mythbusters. We used to watch that forever. And there's an episode of Mythbusters where they take a rail car, a long rail car that carries liquid in it, and they pulled a vacuum in it. And they tried to see if it would collapse, and it wouldn't. But then they dropped a weight on it. They put a dent into that tank, and they pulled a vacuum, and with 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level, it crushed a solid steel tank. That's sea level pressure. You're talking about 380 times that pressure at depth, at 3,800 meters, 13,000 feet. There is no room for it. And this is my point, is you cannot have enough redundancy when it comes to checking this type of equipment.
Obviously, we're on the air live, and I don't know that this is true. And I just tried to check. That's what I was doing. I hope it did distract Dr. M, but Ganja Mama may have smoked too much, because she says, I just heard they found the sub. It's on CNN. If anyone knows anything about that, let's hope it's true and everyone is okay. But I have a feeling that is potentially a false report, which we get in situations like this. Back to Dr. M. So while an international effort is underway to rescue these people, there was a German adventurer who came out. His name is Arthur Leubel. He's 60 years old. And he said he once went on the same exploration, but he called the voyage a, quote, suicide mission as a race against time before the vessel loses its oxygen supply. He said he noticed a slew of red flags. I mean, these are guys who are like legit adventurers, something I will never be, because I like the comfort of my bed and cable TV. Call me crazy. But when these guys are all kind of blowing the whistle, this other guy who's an explorer, again, are they going to have to really go back and not only see what was happening at Ocean Gate, but are they going to have to go back now and check these other submersibles you've been talking about, the ones in the Bahamas or the ones maybe in the Gulf that are laying down, cable and working on oil rigs? Are all of these going to have to be re-examined now?
I don't think so, because again, most of those are following the rules that are established either by industry or by the government, and they have that redundancy. When you watch a SpaceX launch take place, SpaceX happens in the United States. You have the Federal Aviation Administration who is on top of that, and whether you like it or not, they're there to provide that oversight, and they can be a hindrance, they can be a problem, they could cause a difficulty, but at the bottom line, what they're talking about is safety. And in this case, they were literally operating without that safety net in many ways. That outside agency coming in and inspecting, what we call classification society, would be what they were there to do, to identify it. And again, This may also identify we need more stricter standards for how we construct these submersibles for this type of depth. As I said before, I think there's going to be a lot of questions for Horizon Maritime, which operates the vessel they were off of, the Polar Prince. I think there's going to be some questions for the Canadian Ministry of Transportation here, the Transport Ministry that does the inspections of vessels in and out of ports. And then I think the International Maritime Organization is going to look at what do we need to do to ensure there's regulation for the use of submersibles outside of territorial waters.
And we'll go for a few more minutes. I'll push my luck here. Karen Breidenthal says, some Coast Guard interviewed said there was a loud explosion sound at the same time they lost contact. Could that potentially have been an implosion, Dr. M? And is that something that they would have potentially heard?
It could have been. I think the thing with the implosion, again, is a lot of that implosion sound that's heard is metal on metal as it crushes. You know, when your other guest was talking about the San Luis, that's what happened. You had basically steel on steel crushing together, compressing, coming together, and that's what you tend to hear. This object, this submersible, isn't built out of that, so it's a lot different. So I'm not exactly sure how loud a sound is going to be.
Gentil, problem is, even if they're up floating, they still cannot get out and the air is running out. So horrible. Let's say they are floating somewhere and no one is seeing them. Is there a way for them to open the hatch from, the inside? How does that all operate?
No, I think that's one of the reasons why you saw a big, huge influx of aircraft and ships in, because understand the way they do this is they actually drop the submersible upstream because of the Gulf Stream there. They actually have to drop it. And when they drop the submersible, it just falls straight, but it hits the current. And because it's a 2-hour descent, it's going to move. And depending on if basically it bailed out, if it dropped its ballast, it would start to come back up. But the mothership is going to head to where they're supposed to be to pick them up. And so you're not exactly right above it. And so you have to start searching. And then you got to find this minivan size object that isn't very radar reflective because it doesn't have a big mast. It doesn't have, big, huge metal reflectors on it. Now you got to find it in the Atlantic in wave conditions and water conditions. And that's one of the reasons why I think they were trying to either find it at first, and then they called in the cavalry, the Coast Guard, and the Navy to start doing these aerial searches, but they can't get out. They're sealed inside. It's almost like the old space capsules where the astronauts were sealed inside. They couldn't open it. And then, you have Apollo 1 where 3 astronauts are trapped inside and they can't get out during a fire. Eventually they put in explosive hatches, but you don't have that in this case.
Wow. Black Widower saying, damn troll, I went looking, no news, which is what I thought. So if anyone does hear news, let us know. Ski Hat Sarah, is the Coast Guard searching, Dr. M, for the sub at the expense of other emergencies? Are they putting everything on the back burner? Let's say a boat was capsizing off of Cape Cod right now. Would they have to send resources to aid that boat?
No, let me be clear. Talking about the U.S. Coast Guard for a second. So this is being staged out of the 1st Coast Guard District. Rear Admiral Mauger is the one who's been doing the press conferences. When the Coast Guard has a contingency like this, they will move other assets up to cover as they go out, especially on this. This is a really long range for the Coast Guard to head out that distance. So you're pulling C-130s and large aircraft out. They will bring in other assets to cover that. They'll bring personnel back on. The Coast Guard, which is in terms of personnel the size of the New York Police Department, covers the entire United States. You want to talk about an agency that is unheralded? It is the Coast Guard. These are the people who run into hurricanes when everyone's running out. And I would argue they would never minimize or put at risk anybody else. But this is a large rescue operation. And understand the reason that it's such a large rescue operation, of all things, it's the Titanic. Because the Titanic put in the process under SOLAS, that agreement I told you about before, where you have to provide assistance.
Werner says, do not understand, and neither do I, why they got no other system to determine their location than a walkie-talkie thing. We talked about a beacon. This might have been before you came on, but why wasn't there something aboard that would emit a signal, or is that impossible?
Again, you got to go back to the company and the fact that, these are standard procedures that would have been identified in a classification survey. Why is it that, after 24 hours, a beacon doesn't float up? that's released, automatically, through a water dissolvable latch or something like that. Or, again, it emits a beacon so you can home in on it. Again, you have these on vessels all the time. And yet you don't have that on this. Now, again, it could have had it, but they're not saying they ever mounted something like that. Could have been destroyed if the submersible imploded, but we just don't know, because this is a kind of a homemade craft that was built by OceanGate for OceanGate without a lot of oversight.
A few more minutes. I can't push my luck too much. Becky says, James Cameron made the trip in another vessel 33 times. Not to put you on the spot here, because I don't know anything about this. Wondering if you do. On his trip, he talked to his wife on the phone from the bottom of the ocean. Was his vessel tethered? How did it differ from OceanGate? Do you happen to know this?
No, well, the vessel he went down on was, if you watch the movie Titanic, that Russian vessel with those submersibles. Those are the submersibles that he used. These were Russian submersibles that were designed for deep water rescues. And so they much larger submersibles than what you're talking about, outfitted with better communication gear. Basically, what you do is you outfit in a low frequency radio, a radio with a really long frequency, and because that penetrates through the water. The problem is it takes up space and consumes power. And, when you're building something very low frills and you have to manage things, this is one of the things that gets lost is that. That those submersibles had them because they were designed as rescue subs for the Russian Navy, basically. And so they had them so they communicate.
Leslie, I'll go with Lucille McGuire. It fascinates me to think, thank you for the super sticker, by the way, about the line we ride as humans between the risk-taking curiosity and spirit needed to push us into flight, space, and oceans, and the rule-following nature needed to keep us alive. That is true. There is an argument to be made that without these people, we wouldn't advance in terms of exploration. What do you think of this comment, Dr. M?
I think, there's been a lot of bashing for these are rich millionaires and why should we care? Again, I go back to the issue of aviation and space. Look who's, who did it in the 20th century in aviation. Look who's doing it with space now. But again, it changes. It's how you do it. The first automobiles were expensive. Nobody had them but the rich. And then you had Henry Ford come up with the Model T, and boom, every American can have a car. And, a lot of technology comes out of this. A lot of application comes out of this. There's science to be had. They could have been down there and found objects that have not been located before. We could learn a lot. One of my degrees is in nautical archaeology. So, I understand how important wrecks are for finding them. You have a lot of people out there who do that. Paul Allen from Microsoft ran a vessel for a long time, the Petrel, that went out, used ROVs, and found World War II wrecks everywhere in the Pacific, the Lexington, the Johnston. And we learned a lot about how those ships were lost and what happened in the last moments of them. And so I think there's a science element to this. I think it is important, but at the same time, you have to mitigate that with risk assessment. Are we taking a risk? You could have done this dive in a much safer platform, I would argue.
And I love that soundbite of yours, which I'm going to use to tease the show at the beginning, about how the ocean is always looking for ways to kill us, which that's how I feel about it. Have you personally had a close call in all your time on the water?
The irony is I sailed for 7 years on deep draft vessels, and I've been through storms, hurricanes. I got hit by lightning on a ship, had a fire on a ship and everything. But the closest call I ever had on a boat was with my local volunteer fire department on a lake, where I let one guy drive who never should have been behind the wheel of a boat and almost ran us into a dock. And I was sitting on the bow, and I almost got basically cut in half about 5 miles from my house. So that's the closest I ever came to losing my life on a boat.
They say all the accidents happen within like a mile radius of your home, right? What state are you in?
I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Patricia Burns, the press conferences are just to keep media and the public at bay. They know it is already doomed, and that's why all offers of help are being refused. Do you agree with this?
I think you have limitations for offers. Let me be clear. They've moved remotely operated vehicles. They've moved equipment out there. I think, again, there's only so much assistance you can get, especially in the time frame where they're at. and you're in such a limited time frame. You can only get so much out there. I think that press conferences are always meant to do one thing, and that is to provide what information they want to make available. And a lot of the people who I would want to hear from right now aren't available. They're out there. They're in the process of doing this rescue. I talk about the fact that I do firefighting. While I'm fighting the fire, I don't have time to talk about how we're fighting the fire. You got afterwards. That's when you want. And in the midst of a rescue, it's really hard to get good, straight information. But I do think that the assets and material are out there. I think one of the problems, again, goes back to OceanGate, is what was their plan B should plan A fail? Should this submersible not come up? What's our backup plan? Do we have a concept of how to go find this thing, and what are we going to do to go retrieve it? You don't need everything on the boat, but you should have it staged, or at least know where this stuff is to go get it. And it doesn't seem like OceanGate had that.
And this whole topic is making me sweat. I've been in news a long time, and so I know the next story that's coming, and that is going to be taxpayer money. That's what people are going to look at. How much is this costing Americans? It is probably crass and premature to bring that up, but I can guarantee you will start to hear that story tomorrow in the media, especially in light of the fact that there's at least one billionaire on this expedition. How much does something like this, Dr. M? Do you have any idea what this effort will cost the federal government, and who ultimately pays for this?
Well, normally in a marine salvage operation, you would have insurance. I mean, this is what you have insurance either on the vessel or on the cargo. And so one of the things you would have to do is reimburse on that based on this. But again, it's not clear to me who insured this endeavor. Who does OceanGate have their insurance wins to offset this? In terms of the U.S. Coast Guard, for example, this will come out of their operating budget. They'll shift money around if they have to. They will cut back on some flights for aircraft if they need to. But yeah, it's going to cost money. And the thing about this effort too is you're seeing a lot of vessels pulled in. Now, understand, under a mayday, under distress, vessels have to respond. They don't have a choice. And usually they will, suck that up into their budget and then sue or level a salvage fee up against the company. So one of the things I envisioned happening here is OceanGate goes away as a company. It's just going to dissolve. It's just, there's no way it survives this. Whatever assets they have will be used to recoup this, let alone lawsuits by those who are on board. By the way, if for some miracle the CEO does survive, it'll be even worse. That's when he'll really get it from the media. If he perishes, the taxpayer dollar story won't be quite as bad. I don't even understand this question, but Dr. Bob is a doctor, I take it, so I'll ask it. And Dr. M, I'm hoping you understand it. Do the scrubbers require power to work to make O2 from CO2? No, these submersibles usually operate with some compressed air, but they operate with scrubbers. It's kind of what's used in space travel, where basically, what you do is you scrub out the carbon dioxide, so you prevent the buildup of carbon dioxide, and you reuse the oxygen that's in the air. And that's the dangerous thing. It's not so much running out of oxygen; it's having too much carbon dioxide is the issue. So the system should be working without electrics. It should be valve and mechanisms that work it, so that you can just turn valves and get oxygen in with scrubbers. It's designed for that. But again, I go back to the fact that this is built, sole source. There's nobody who's checking it saying, okay, this is the American Bureau of Standard, for air supply on the ship. Who knows? Because he says it in the waiver that this vessel is not, certified. And it's amazing that he says that. And I'm amazed at the intelligence of STS Nation here and Room. The Titanic went down because of deficits in the hull sensor strength or tensor strength. I wonder if there might not have been a hull metal fatigue issue that basically breached and imploded, Dr. M? Yeah, well, I mean, hitting the iceberg kind of contributed to that too. But there could have been an imperfection in the hull, and that could have happened by accident. Again, if you look at the image of this vessel, you see it has an outer skin around it. It has you'll see it bolted in, and there's a frame around it that protects the tube that they're in. So because you don't want that getting dinged, you don't want that getting hit, you don't want that. But one of the things that would be typical is after a dive, you would inspect that hull, you would take it apart, you would look at it, you would do sensor scanning to ensure that the depth and the strength of the hull hasn't diminished. But if you're just going by hull popping sounds, okay, that sounds normal. Then you may miss it until that one big sound comes.
And we're going to wrap up in just one sec. Ima Chidiro, do the floats require their own power to activate?
I think he's talking about the floats that attach when it resurfaces back. If you look at the platform it's on, it's got those 4 floats on the corner, and that's what's used to kind of actually holds the platform. It doesn't hold the submersible. What actually happens is the platform drops down into the ocean, and then the floats will actually pull it back up, and so you can bring it back up at it. I'm not that familiar with the platform and the specifics of it, so I can't give you a definitive on that.
Toy White says this is just also overwhelming. Officials said in their live briefing 20 minutes ago that the ocean is noisy, and these do not appear to be like Morse code. I was hopeful until I heard that. Aria D says 10 hours remaining for those aboard the Titan. I hope a miracle happens. It was a miracle that I got Dr. Salvatore R. Mercogliano, and I can say it, as an associate professor of history at Campbell University in North Carolina and an adjunct professor at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Marine Transportation from the State University of New York Maritime College, along with a Merchant Marine Deck Officer license. The bottom line is he also holds a PhD in military and naval history from the University of Alabama, hence the doctor title. So the bottom line is this guy knows a lot. Dr. M, I'm begging you to come back hopefully as soon as tomorrow. Is that a potential possibility?
Yeah, I'll have to see. I was literally before the reason that kept me from getting on with you is I was talking to Singapore TV. So if I'm available, I'm happy to come on.
And there you go. Real quick, I like to always think about the people. Stockton Rush, he is the founder and the chief executive of Ocean Gate Expeditions. He is aboard, as is Hamish Harding, a British businessman, an explorer, a billionaire. But just because you're a billionaire doesn't mean you deserve to die. A lot of hate being sent his way. Paul-Henri Narjolet, a French maritime expert. And then you've got a British Pakistani businessman named Shanzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. So let's pray that they are all okay. Tomorrow night, we are back 7 p.m. Eastern with the Dan Markel case, 150 plus reasons why Wendy Adelson should be indicted. And I'm going to look to do another show about the submersible tomorrow, especially if I can get Dr. M and Andy Norris, as well as Dr. X and Butch Hendrick. A huge shout out to all of them. Until then, love you, America. Love you, North Carolina. Love you, UK, Australia, and everyone in between. Dr. M, hang on 1 second for me.